My dad came to my house asking for a place to stay. I refused, and he called me ungrateful after everything he'd done for me. So I replied, "You abandoned me when I was 5. Don't talk to me about gratitude." The day my father walked back into my life was ordinary in every way, until it wasn't. I was finishing up some yard work, the late afternoon sun warming my back as I rad weaves into neat piles. My house wasn't anything special, just a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. But it was mine, paid for with years of hard work and careful saving, something I'd learned to do early out of necessity. I was so focused on the task at hand that I didn't notice the unfamiliar car pull up across the street. Didn't see the man get out and stand there watching me for several long minutes. It wasn't until I straightened up, stretching my back, that I caught sight of him. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. 25 years had changed him, grayed his hair, lined his face, softened the once athletic build I vaguely remembered. But then he smiled, and despite the decades between us, I knew immediately who he was. My father, the man who had walked out of our small apartment one Tuesday morning when I was 5 years old, promising to bring home ice cream after work. The man whose empty promises had left my mother working 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. The man whose absence had defined so much of my childhood. "Danny boy," he called, crossing the street with his arms open wide like we were old friends reuniting after a brief separation, not a father who had abandoned his son for a quarter-century without so much as a birthday card. I stood frozen, rake still in my hands, as he approached. 1,000 emotions crashed through me at once: confusion, anger, curiosity, a strange, unwelcome flicker of that childhood longing I thought I'd outgrown decades ago. "Look at you," he said, stopping a few feet away, eyes taking in my home, my yard, the evidence of the stable life I'd built without him. "All grown up, doing well for yourself, I see." I found my voice, although it came out rougher than I expected. "What are you doing here?" He didn't seem bothered by my cold reception. His smile never faltered. "Can't a father visit his son? It's been too long, Danny." "It's Daniel," I corrected automatically. No one had called me Danny since he left. And yes, it has been too long. 25 years too long. He at least had the decency to look somewhat abashed at that, dropping his gaze momentarily before meeting my eyes again. I know. I've got a lot to make up for. But I'm here now, aren't I? Better late than never." Better late than never. As if his absence had been a slightly delayed train arrival, rather than an abandonment that had shaped my entire life. "How did you find me?" I asked, realizing I didn't even know how he'd tracked me down after all this time. "Your mother," he said simply. "I reached out to her a few months back trying to reconnect. She wasn't too happy to hear from me, as you can imagine, but she did tell me where you were living now." I made a mental note to call my mother later. She and I weren't particularly close, our relationship strained by the years she'd been absent herself, working endless shifts just to keep us afloat after he left. But we maintained contact, holiday calls, and occasional visits. She could have warned me he was looking for me. "Well, now you've seen me," I said, turning back to my yard work. "I'm alive. I'm fine. Mission accomplished." "Danny?" "Daniel?" He quickly corrected himself. "I was hoping we could talk properly." "Talk?" "There's a lot I want to explain, to apologize for." I stopped again, studying him more carefully. There was something in his manner, a kind of nervous energy that hadn't been there in the confident man who approached me initially. Something behind the smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Fine," I said after a moment. "Let me finish up here. You can wait on the porch if you want." He nodded gratefully and made his way to my front porch while I finished raking, using the physical labor to process the shock of seeing him again. By the time I joined him, I had my emotions under better control. I didn't invite him inside. Instead, I sat on the porch swing across from the chair he'd chosen, maintaining a deliberate distance between us. "So," I said, "you wanted to talk?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I owe you an explanation, Daniel, for leaving, for staying away, for all of it." "I'm listening." I kept my tone neutral, giving away nothing of the turmoil beneath. "I was young when I had you. Too young, really. Your mother and I, we loved each other, but we weren't ready for a family. I tried for 5 years. I tried, but I felt trapped, like I was drowning a little more each day. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. That doesn't excuse what I did, walking out like that. I know that. There's no excuse good enough. I said nothing, just waited. This rehearsed apology wasn't why he had tracked me down after all these years. People don't suddenly develop a conscience after 2.5 decades of silence. After I left, I told myself I'd come back when I had something to offer you, when I'd made something of myself. But time passed, and it got harder to imagine how to re-enter your life. What would I say? How could I explain? So I kept putting it off, telling myself next year, until somehow 25 years had gone by. And now? I prompted when he paused. What changed? Why show up on my doorstep today? He shifted in his seat, the nervous energy more pronounced now. Well, life hasn't exactly gone according to plan. I've had some setbacks. Lost my job a few months back when the company downsized. Then the landlord raised the rent on my apartment, and I couldn't swing it anymore. And there it was, the real reason for his sudden desire to reconnect. The thing is, he continued, his eyes now fixed on my home rather than on me, family is supposed to help family, right? Blood is thicker than water and all that. I was thinking maybe I could stay with you for a little while, just until I get back on my feet. Wouldn't take long. I've got some promising leads on jobs. I almost laughed at the audacity, but there was nothing funny about the situation. This man, this stranger who happened to share my DNA, had abandoned me without a thought, left my mother and me struggling for years, and now expected me to welcome him with open arms because we were family? Family takes care of each other, he added, with what I'm sure he thought was a winning smile. I need a place to stay. I took a deep breath before answering, careful to keep my voice level. Let me get this straight. You walked out on Mom and me when I was 5. Never called, never sent so much as a birthday card, no child support, nothing. I built my entire life without you, and now you show up expecting me to take care of you because we're family? His smile faltered slightly. I know it sounds bad when you put it like that, but yes, I'm your father, Danny. Despite everything, that means something. It's Daniel, I corrected again, more firmly this time. And no, being my biological father doesn't mean anything. You haven't been a father to me in any way that matters. Now his expression hardened, the friendly facade slipping away. So that's it. You're just going to turn your back on me when I need help? After everything I've done for you? I couldn't help it. I laughed. It burst out of me, sharp and disbelieving. Everything you've done for me? What exactly have you done for me besides disappear? I gave you life, didn't I? He retorted, as if that single act of biology 20 years before carried some immense debt I was obligated to repay. And then you abandoned that life, I pointed out. You don't get credit just for existing. He stood up suddenly, anger replacing the earlier friendly demeanor. You know what? Your mother really did a number on you. Filled your head with who knows what about me. I bet she never told you how she drove me away, how impossible she made it to stay. This attempt to shift blame onto my mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion year after year to give me a decent life, ignited something in me. I stood as well, no longer bothering to hide my anger. My mother didn't have to tell me anything. You told me everything I needed to know when you walked out and never looked back. When you missed every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone. When you never once asked yourself how your son was doing growing up without a father. You have no idea what I asked myself, he snapped. You have no idea what I went through. And whose fault is that? I shot back. You could have been part of my life. You chose not to be. We stood there, facing each other, two strangers connected by blood, but nothing else. In his eyes, I could see the entitlement, the genuine belief that I owed him something, despite his complete absence from my life. So that's it, he finally said. You're not going to help me, your own father. I took another deep breath, working to regain my composure. I'm not going to let you stay here, no. But I'm not completely heartless. I can give you some money for a motel for a few nights. Maybe help you find some resources for people in your situation. His face contorted with disgust. Charity? You're offering me charity? I'm offering you more than you ever gave me, I replied evenly. You ungrateful little, he began, but stopped himself, visibly struggling to control his temper. Then he tried a different approach, his voice softening. "Daniel, please, I'm your father. I know I messed up. I know I wasn't there for you, but I want to make it right. Give me a chance to be in your life now." For a brief moment, I could see the desperate man behind the manipulation. Part of me even felt a flicker of pity. But I'd learned long ago to trust actions over words, and his actions over 25 years spoke volumes. "If you really wanted to make things right," I said quietly, "you wouldn't have started by asking for a place to stay. You would have started by truly apologizing, by showing genuine remorse, by trying to understand what your absence did to Mom and me. You would have wanted to know me as a person, not as a potential solution to your housing problem." He stared at me, and I could see the moment he realized his approach wasn't going to work. His expression hardened again. "Fine, keep your precious house to yourself. I'll figure something out on my own." "Like I always have. Like we always had to," I corrected. "After you left." He turned and stormed down the porch steps without another word. I watched as he got into his car and drove away, wondering if this would be the last time I ever saw him, or if he would try again with a different angle once the initial rejection wore off. I stood there long after his car disappeared from view, feeling strangely hollow. The confrontation I'd imagined countless times throughout my childhood and teenage years had finally happened, but it brought none of the closure I might have hoped for. Instead, I was left with more questions than answers, and a lingering sense of disappointment that the man who had helped create me could be so fundamentally selfish. That night, I called my mother. "He found you," she said simply when I told her about my father's visit. It wasn't a question. "You could have warned me he was looking," I replied, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. She sighed. "I didn't think he'd actually do it. He called me out of the blue a few months ago asking about you. I told him you were doing well without him. I hoped that would be the end of it." Well, it wasn't. He showed up wanting a place to stay. My mother's bitter laugh echoed through the phone. "Of course he did. That man never did anything unless there was something in it for him." We talked for a while longer, really talked in a way we rarely did. About him, about the years after he left, about how his absence had shaped both our lives. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it felt necessary, like lancing a wound that had been festering for too long. "I'm sorry," she said eventually. "For all of it. For choosing him in the first place, for not being there enough after he left." "You did what you could," I told her, meaning it. "We survived." "We did more than survive," she corrected gently. "Look at you now. Look at what you've built. All on your own." Not entirely on my own, I thought, but didn't say. There had been people who helped along the way. Teachers who took an interest. The neighbor who taught me to change a tire and fix a leaky faucet. My first boss, who took a chance on a kid with no experience. All the surrogate father figures who had filled in the gaps he left behind. A week passed with no further contact from my father. Then, too, I began to think that might be the end of it, that he had moved on to other potential sources of support. But then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find him standing there, soaked from the rain, looking considerably more disheveled than when I'd last seen him. "Before you say anything," he began, raising his hands in a placating gesture, "I'm not here to ask for a place to stay. I wanted to apologize properly this time." I studied him wearily, but stepped aside to let him in. I wasn't heartless enough to leave him standing in the downpour. He stood awkwardly in my entryway, dripping onto the mat, making no move to remove his wet jacket, until I pointed him toward the coat rack. "You want coffee?" I offered, more out of ingrained politeness than genuine hospitality. "You look like you could use it." He nodded gratefully, and I led him to the kitchen where he sat at my table while I made coffee. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, with steaming mugs in front of us, he spoke. "I handled things badly when I came to see you. I wasn't thinking about what you might feel, only about what I needed. That was selfish of me." I nodded but said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. "The truth is," he continued, "I'm in a bad spot. Lost my job, like I said, but also I've got some health issues. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but I need medical care I can't afford." I thought he trailed off, shaking his head. It doesn't matter what I thought. I was wrong to show up after all these years expecting you to solve my problems.
What kind of health issues? I asked, despite myself.
Heart condition, he said. Needs some procedures, medications, the works.
But no insurance?
Not anymore. And as it turns out, hospitals don't accept I'm someone's father as payment.
He attempted a weak smile at his own joke.
I sipped my coffee, considering him. It was hard to separate truth from manipulation with a man I didn't really know, despite our shared DNA. Was this another angle? A more sophisticated attempt to play on my sympathies? Or was he genuinely ill and apologetic?
I'm not asking you for anything, he hurried to add.
Not money, not a place to stay. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. For leaving, for missing your whole childhood, for showing up like I did and expecting you to welcome me with open arms.
He looked down at his coffee,
Both hands wrapped around the mug like he was absorbing its warmth. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Daniel. Walking out on you and your mother was the biggest. I can't change that. I can't go back and be the father you deserved. But I want you to know I regret it. Every day I regret it. I let his words hang in the air between us, trying to gauge their sincerity. There seemed to be genuine remorse there. But 25 years of absence couldn't be erased with a single apology, no matter how heartfelt.
Where are you staying? I asked eventually.
Motel for now, he replied. Week to week. Won't be able to swing next week's payment, though, so I'll probably be looking at shelters after that. I nodded slowly.
And what's your plan?
He shrugged, the gesture conveying a lifetime of poor decisions and lack of foresight. Haven't figured that out yet. Try to find work, I guess? Something that doesn't require too much physical exertion with the heart and all. We talked a while longer. He told me about the years after he left, his failed attempts at building a better life, the series of jobs and relationships that never quite worked out. I shared a little about my own life, carefully edited versions of my childhood and the path that had led me to where I was now. It wasn't a reconciliation, not even close, but it was something. A fragile bridge across the chasm of years between us. When he made to leave, I surprised myself by saying, I know of a place. Transitional housing for men in difficult situations. They help with job placement, medical referrals, that sort of thing. I could make a call, see if they have space. The relief on his face was instant and genuine. That would be a huge help. Thank you. I nodded. I'll let you know what they say. As he turned to go, he hesitated, then asked, Do you think maybe we could talk again sometime? I'd like to get to know you, if you're willing. I didn't answer immediately, weighing the potential for disappointment against the possibility, however slim, of some kind of healing. Let's take it one step at a time, I finally said. No promises, but I'm not saying no. He accepted this with a nod, seeming to understand it was the most I could offer right now. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about fathers and sons, about the legacies we inherit and the ones we choose for ourselves, about forgiveness and its limits. I did make that call to the transitional housing program. They had space, and my father moved in a few days later. I visited once, making sure he was settled and connected with their medical services coordinator. It wasn't much, but it was something I could do without compromising my own boundaries. We've spoken a few times since then, brief conversations that carefully navigate the vast territory of our shared history. I'm not sure what will come of this tentative reconnection. Maybe nothing. Maybe something small, but meaningful. What I am sure of is this. I don't owe him a relationship because of biology. Whatever connection we build, if any, will be on my terms, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. He may have given me life, but I created my own path through it. And I won't let him or anyone else make me feel ungrateful for protecting what I've built. The 5-year-old boy who waited for his father to come home with promised ice cream has long since grown into a man who understands that some promises aren't meant to be kept. Some absences can't be filled. Some relationships can't be repaired. But that doesn't mean we're broken. It just means we've learned to stand strong on our own. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up, who stays, who makes the choice to be there through all of life's moments, big and small. My father may have helped create me, but he never chose to be my family. That distinction matters more than any shared DNA ever could. So, was I wrong to initially turn him away? To set boundaries with the man who gave me half my genetic makeup, but none of the guidance, support, or love that a father should provide? I don't think so. Self-respect isn't the same as ingratitude, and protecting yourself isn't the same as cruelty. Sometimes the most meaningful act of compassion is allowing people to face the consequences of their own choices. And sometimes the most powerful form of forgiveness doesn't look like throwing open the doors to your home, but rather opening a small window to possibility with clear boundaries and eyes wide open. I don't know what the future holds for my father and me, but I do know that whatever happens, I'll face it as I've faced everything else in my life since he walked out that door 25 years ago, on my own terms, with the strength he never knew I had.